Elliot Voss had a system, and it worked well enough for a man who spent most of his time alone. He woke up somewhere around noon. He made coffee that went cold on the desk beside him. He sat down in front of monitors surrounded by notes he had written himself and never quite acted on, and he wrote. Not novels, not anything with a spine or a publisher or a deadline that anyone else cared about. Just stories, short pieces about things that crawled out of the darker parts of the imagination and refused to go back. He had been at it long enough to have found his footing, and long enough to have built something small but real out of it, a following, not the kind that made headlines or sold merchandise. The kind that showed up every October and came back the next year and the year after that, because he had never once given them something that felt cheap or rushed. They trusted him with their unease, and he took that seriously even if he would never have said so out loud. He worked from a house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of a mid-sized city where the streets were wide and the yards were deep, and you could go the better part of a week without laying eyes on another person. He liked it that way. He had tried living in places with more noise and more proximity and found that neither suited him. Here the only sound most mornings was a coffee maker and whatever was playing low on his computer, and occasionally the distant sound of a lawnmower 2 streets over. He knew his neighbors the way you know the people who exist at the edges of your daily life. By car and mailbox, and the occasional wave from a driveway. The woman next door was the closest thing he had to an exception, and even that was not saying much. Her name was Ayanna. She was older and Native American, and she kept to herself with a kind of deliberate quiet that Elliot respected without ever examining too closely. In 3 years of living next door, he had spoken to her maybe a dozen times. Brief exchanges at the property line about nothing in particular. She was not unfriendly. She was simply contained in a way that made small talk feel like an intrusion. He had never pushed it, and she had never invited more, and that arrangement had suited them both just fine. October arrived the way it always did, and Elliot felt a familiar shift in his work. Something that happened every year around the time the light started going golden earlier in the afternoon. The stories that came out of him in October were always a little sharper, a little closer to the thing he was actually reaching for. He had spent most of the month building something new, a creature not based on anything existing, not pulled from mythology or folklore, something he had assembled from scratch out of instinct and the particular kind of dread that lives in the space between familiar and wrong. He called them the Varek, a tall, thin shadow in the shape of something human. The outline was wrong in small ways that the brain registered before the eyes could name. The arms hung too long. The head tilted at an angle that never corrected. The shoulders were too narrow for the height. The legs too long for the torso. From a distance, of Varek looked like a person standing completely still in the dark. Up close, it looked like nothing that should exist in the same world as the person looking at it. He wrote about the way they moved, slow and deliberate, without any of the small adjustments a human body makes when it shifts its weight. No hesitation, no fidgeting, just a closing of distance that made running feel like the right idea and also feel completely pointless at the same time. He wrote about the way they appeared at the edges of things, driveways and tree lanes and the far end of parking lots, always at the boundary between the lit and the unlit, always watching. He spent the last week of October refining the details until the whole thing felt true in a way only the best horror felt true. Not believable exactly, just inevitable. Like something you had always half suspected was out there and had simply never had a name for until now. On the night of October 30th, he posted the story to his page. He did not add a fiction label. It was Halloween week, and the ambiguity was part of the tradition. His readers knew what they were getting when they came to his page. He had never needed to put a warning sign on the door before, and he saw no reason to start. He closed the laptop and went to bed without giving it another thought. He slept fine. By morning, everything had changed. His phone had been going since before he woke up. The notifications had stacked themselves into something he had never seen before. Comments in the hundreds, shares he had not tracked, emails from addresses he did not recognize, and threaded through all of it the same thing repeated in different voices from different cities and different states. People were seeing something. Something tall and thin standing at the edge of driveways and tree lanes and the far end of parking lots. Something that matched his description in ways that made people want to know if he had based a story on a real event. Elliot read through the first several dozen with his cold coffee and a slow grin spreading across his face. The internet always came through at Halloween. He scrolled through comments from people in Ohio and Texas and Oregon, and a handful from Canada, all describing the same thing in slightly different words. Something standing in their yard. Something at the end of their street. Something that had been there when they went to bed and was gone by morning, but had left them with the kind of feeling that does not go away after a night of sleep. He read it all with the easy confidence of a man who had been doing this long enough to recognize a good reaction when he saw one. His followers were committed. They played along with the spirit of the thing, and they did it convincingly. He had worked hard for that kind of readership, and moments like this were the payoff. Someone had even gone to the trouble of posting a blurry photograph of something standing at the edge of a tree line with the caption that matched the line from his story almost exactly. He saved it to his desktop. Maybe he would use it somewhere. By mid-morning, the comments had climbed past 1,000, and his email inbox had more unread messages than he usually got in a month. He answered a few of the more thoughtful ones with short replies that kept the fiction alive without confirming or denying anything. It was a game he had played before, and he was good at it. He made a fresh pot of coffee that he also did not finish. He put on a record and sat back down at his desk and felt the particular satisfaction of work that had landed. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. A few kids in early costumes moved along the sidewalk across the street. A plastic skeleton swayed on a porch railing 3 houses down. Ayana's car was in her driveway the way it almost always was. Nothing about the day felt different from any other October day, except for the steady climb of numbers on his screen. By afternoon, the shares had pushed the story in front of people who had never heard him before. New followers arrived in batches. The comments from strangers were less playful than the ones from his regulars. Some of them sounded genuinely unsettled. A few asked him directly whether the story was based on something real. He answered those the same way he answered everything, with just enough ambiguity to keep the door open. It was Halloween week. Ambiguity was the whole point. He did not think about it again that evening. He ate leftovers at his desk and watched something on his laptop that he could not have described 20 minutes after it ended, and went to bed at a reasonable hour feeling good about the week. The notifications were still coming in when he turned the light off. He fell asleep listening to them buzz against the nightstand and felt nothing but the low, warm satisfaction of a story that had done exactly what he needed it to do. The next morning arrived gray and cold the way late October mornings do in that part of the country. Elliot woke up to a phone that had not stopped since he fell asleep. The number of notifications had crossed into territory he had never seen before. The story had moved well past his regular readership and was now circulating in spaces he did not recognize. Forums he had never posted to. Pages dedicated to paranormal sightings and unexplained phenomena. Someone had screenshotted the story and posted it without context on 3 separate platforms where it was being treated not as horror fiction, but as a first-hand account of a real encounter. The comments on those posts were different from the ones on his own page. Less playful, more literal. People tagging friends and family in states he had not heard from yet. He sat at his desk with his first cold coffee of the day and read through a cross-section of what was out there. The playful Halloween energy from the day before was still there in some corners, but it was getting harder to find. He told himself that was normal. Stories took on a life of their own, sometimes especially around Halloween, when the line between performance and belief got deliberately blurry. He had designed the story to feel real. He had worked at it carefully. If people were taking it literally, that was a sign the work had been effective. He answered a few more emails. He made a note to himself to post a follow-up on his page later in the week, something that kept the ambiguity going without confirming anything that would kill the mood. He had done it before. He knew how to manage the life cycle of a viral Halloween story. He opened a new document and started jotting notes for something he might write in November when all of this had settled down. Outside, Ayana's car was still in the driveway. The skeleton was still swaying 3 houses down. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. He had no reason at all to think that anything was wrong. He spent the rest of the morning at his desk the way he spent most mornings, working through the low-level noise of an inbox that was busier than usual, scrolling past the same handful of viral posts that kept resurfacing in his feed. By early afternoon, the story had accumulated more engagement than anything he had written before. He noted that with the satisfaction of someone who had put in the work and seen it pay off. He was not rattled. He was not concerned. He was a man who wrote about things that did not exist, and he had done his job well. Whatever was happening out there in the comments and the forums and the group chats, he would never see was a natural consequence of a story that had worked. He closed his laptop at a reasonable hour and went to make dinner. The notifications kept coming. He did not check them again until morning. He was not worried at all. Elliot spent the first full day after posting the way he spent most days when a story was doing well. He kept one eye on the screen and one eye on whatever else he was supposed to be working on and let the numbers climb without paying them too much attention. The comments were still coming in fast, and the share count had moved into territory that made him feel quietly good about himself. He skimmed through the new ones the way you skim a news feed when you already know the general shape of what you're going to find. People playing along. People pretending to be scared. People tagging their friends and saying things like, "Do not read this alone." It was exactly what a well-crafted Halloween story was supposed to produce, and he accepted it with the low satisfaction of someone who had worked hard and seen it pay off. He answered a few emails from his regular readers. He made coffee. He did not finish it. He put on a record and let the afternoon go by without doing much of anything that could be called productive. It was Halloween week. He had earned the downtime. The videos started appearing on the second day, not just screenshots and written accounts. Actual footage. Short clips filmed on phones in driveways and backyards and from bedroom windows at odd hours of night. The quality was what you would expect from phone cameras in low light. Grainy, dark, hard to make out the details. Elliot watched the first few with his feet up and the kind of detached appreciation you feel when someone else does the work of selling your story for you. People had gone out into their yards with their phones and staged something that looked convincing enough to pass on a casual scroll. He respected the commitment. He was not looking for the seams at first. He did not think he needed to. He had been in this space long enough to know what a well-produced Halloween hoax looked like and what a badly produced one looked like, and he assumed he was looking at a mix of both. He clicked through a dozen of them in a row and found nothing that made him pause. Figures in the dark, shapes at the edge of tree limbs. Nothing his imagination had not already covered in the original story. Then on the second afternoon, he watched one that had been filmed from a second-floor window. The camera was steadier than most. The angle was high enough to give a clearer view of the shape standing at the end of the driveway below. He watched it through once without stopping. Then he went back to the beginning and watched it again. Then a third time. He set his coffee down on the third viewing and did not pick it up again. The figure in the video had the arm proportions wrong in exactly the way he had written them. Not close, not approximately, exactly the way the arms hung just past where they should have ended. The particular angle of the shoulder relative to the elbow. He had written that detail carefully, and he had almost cut it twice before leaving it in because it felt like the kind of thing that would land for readers who paid attention. It was buried in a longer paragraph. It was not something you could reverse engineer from a casual read of the post. He went back to the story and read through the relevant section 3 times to be certain. The arm detail was not there. He had described the height and the stillness and the head tilt. He had described the way the shape appeared at boundaries between light and dark. But the specific proportional detail of the arms had stayed in his notes and never made it into the final post. He sat with that for a while. He told himself there were explanations. He told himself the human brain was good at pattern matching, and sometimes matched patterns that were not actually there. He told himself that the person who filmed the video had read something else he had written, an older piece, a draft he had shared somewhere and forgotten about. He pulled up his archive and looked. He found nothing. By the end of that day, there were more videos, and more of them were getting harder to dismiss. Not because any single one was definitive, but because the accumulation of specific details that matched things he had written and not published was getting difficult to explain away as coincidence. An email arrived from an address he did not recognize. The handle was silentembers25@gmail. The message was short. It said they had seen something outside their house the night before. It said the shape matched what Elliot had described in the story exactly. It said they needed to know if there was a way to make it leave, and asked if he had left something out. Elliot read the email twice. Then he closed it and went back to the videos. He told himself it was still Halloween. He told himself the internet was full of people who committed fully to a bit. He told himself he was a horror writer, and his instinct was to find the darkest explanation for everything, and that instinct was not always right. He made another pot of coffee and sat back down and tried to feel the same easy confidence he had felt 2 days ago. It was harder to locate than it had been. The news alerts started coming in around 9 that evening. Local stations in 3 different states running the same basic story. Unusual sightings reported by multiple residents in multiple neighborhoods. Descriptions that matched each other. Descriptions that matched the thing he had written. Then a report from Canada. Then one from England filed within the same hour as the Canadian one. Elliot sat at his desk and read each alert as it came in. He did not move from the chair for a long time. The first missing persons report came through just before midnight. A family of 4 from a suburb outside Cleveland. Gone overnight. Neighbors had reported seeing something standing in the yard of the house the previous evening. The description in the news report matched the scene Elliot had written almost word for word. He had written that scene in the second week of October sitting at the same desk. He was sitting at now, and he felt good about it at the time because it had the kind of specific dread that was hard to manufacture. He closed his laptop and sat in the dark of his office for a very long time and did not feel good about anything. He opened the laptop again after a while and went back to the missing persons report looking for something that did not match. Something that would let him put distance between the story and what had happened to that family in Ohio. He read it 3 times. Every detail that was available lined up with what he had written. The time of disappearance. The way the neighbors described the figure in the yard. The fact that there was no sign of struggle inside the house. He had written all of that. He had invented it as a way to make the story feel complete, and now it was sitting in a news report filed by a real police department about real people who were actually missing. He pushed back from the desk and stood up and walked to the window. The street outside was dark and quiet. A few Halloween decorations still lit up along the block. Nothing at the edge of any driveway. Nothing at any tree line. He stood there for longer than he needed to, and then he went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and stood at the kitchen sink and drank it slowly. He went back to the desk. He opened his email. There were 47 new messages since he had last checked. He read through the subject lines without opening most of them. Variations on the same thing. Questions about the story. questions about whether it was real, questions about what to do if you saw something. One from a woman in Georgia who said her husband had not come home from taking the dog out, and she needed to know if Elliot had written anything about how to get someone back. He stared at that one for a long time. He did not know what to write back. He did not write anything. He closed the email and sat in the quiet of his house and listened to the sounds it made at night. The refrigerator, the heat clicking on, the distant sound of a car 2 streets over. Everything normal. Everything exactly as it should be. He went to bed at 2 a.m. and lay in the dark with his eyes open for a long time before sleep found him. He told himself there was a rational explanation for all of it. He told himself he would find it in the morning. He told himself the story was fiction, and that was all it was, and that was all it could be. He believed that. He almost entirely believed that. The notifications were still coming in when he finally closed his eyes. The morning brought more of the same, and then more than that. The missing family in Ohio was picked up by national outlets by 9 a.m. By 10, there were 2 more reports from different states. A woman in Tennessee who had last been seen standing at her back door looking into the yard. A man in Washington state who had texted his wife from his driveway at 11 at night to say he would be right in and had not come back inside. Elliot read each new report as it arrived with the growing and terrible feeling of reading something he had already written. The details were not identical. They were not supposed to be identical. In his story, he had established a pattern, not a script. He had written the shape of how it happened, the setting, the timing, the progression from sighting to disappearance. And that pattern was playing out in real time across multiple states with consistency that had no explanation he was willing to say out loud. He checked the Silent Embers 25 email again. He wrote a reply and deleted it. He wrote another and deleted that one too. He did not know what to say to someone who was asking him how to make something leave when he was still trying to convince himself that something was not real. He closed the email client. He opened it again 10 minutes later. He had 14 new messages. He closed it again. By afternoon, he had stopped pretending to work on anything else. He sat at his desk and watched the news and read the reports as they came in and tried to find the shape of something he could do. He could not find it. Not yet. But the certainty that had carried him through the first 2 days was gone now, and what had replaced it was something quieter and heavier and much harder to put down. He made coffee at some point in the late afternoon and stood in the kitchen while it brewed and looked out the window at Ayana's house next door. Her car was in the driveway. Her lights were on. Everything next door looked exactly as it always had. He carried his coffee back to the desk and sat down and pulled up the original story one more time. He read through the whole thing slowly. Every sentence. Every scene. He was looking for something that did not match. Something he could point to that would separate the story from what was happening. He found nothing. The story matched. All of it. He closed the file and sat in the dark with his coffee going cold in his hand, and the news still running on the other monitor, and the notifications still stacking up on his phone, and tried to decide what a reasonable person would do next. He had no idea. The missing persons reports were coming in faster than anyone seemed prepared to process them. By the end of the first week after Halloween, the count had climbed past 40 families across 9 states. Elliot tracked it the way you track, something you cannot stop watching even when you know it is making things worse. He had a news tab open on one monitor and his email on the other, and he moved between them with the mechanical rhythm of someone who had run out of ways to pretend he was doing anything else. The families were from different states, different demographics, different parts of cities, and different kinds of neighborhoods. The only thing connecting them was the reports that neighbors and family members had filed in the hours before the disappearances. Something standing outside the house, something in the yard or the driveway or visible through a window from the street. something that matched the description Elliot had written in enough specific ways that the connection was now being made publicly and repeatedly by people online who had read the story. He read those threads with a particular kind of dread that had no good name. By the middle of the second week, the number had more than tripled, and the reports were no longer confined to the United States. Brazil filed a cluster of missing persons cases out of a single neighborhood in Sao Paulo. Japan had 2 separate incidents in different cities on the same night. Reports came in from Australia and South Africa within hours of each other. The geography made no sense to anyone trying to find a pattern, because the pattern was not geographic. It was not following population centers or climate, or any variable that made sense on a map. The only variable that tracked was viewership. The videos of the sightings were still spreading, and the places with the highest concentration of new missing persons cases were the places where the videos had been shared the most in the preceding days. Elliot noticed that on a Thursday afternoon, and sat very still at his desk for a long time after noticing it. The videos themselves had changed. In the early footage, the shapes had simply stood and watched, appearing at boundaries, standing in yards and at the edges of driveways, and visible at the far end of lit streets, motionless in the particular way he had written them. By the second week, the footage was different. They were moving now, not quickly, not frantically, just closing the distance in the slow, deliberate way that made watching the clips almost unbearable. In one video, a man backed across his own front lawn, trying to get away from something at the end of his driveway, and the camera caught the moment his back hit the door behind him, and he went inside, and the door closed, and the shape in the driveway simply stood there for another few seconds before the person filming from across the street turned the camera away. Nobody followed up on what happened to man after the door closed. In another clip, a woman filmed from behind a curtain on what looked like a ground floor window. The shape was visible at the edge of the yard. She held the camera steady for almost a minute, and then the footage cut off. The account that posted it had not uploaded anything since. Elliot watched both of those clips more than once. He could not have explained why. He had written the creature. He had written the way it moved and the way it approached and the way encounters with it ended. Watching it happen in real footage filmed by real people was something that did not have a category in his experience yet. His inbox had become a place he had to prepare himself to open. The messages were arriving in waves now, hundreds a day, from people in cities he had never visited and countries he had never traveled to. The tone had shifted from the early messages that had a Halloween quality to them. These were not people playing along. These were people who were frightened in a way that came to the screen regardless of the language they were writing in. They asked him the same things in different words. How do you stop it? What do you do if you see one? Is there a way to protect the house? Is there a way to get someone back after they go missing? He had no answers. He had never written answers because he had written a horror story, not a survival guide, and it had not occurred to him that he would ever need one. He answered none of the emails. He could not think of anything to say that would not make everything worse. The first time Detective Beckett Marsh came to his door was on a Thursday morning in the second week of November. 2 officers, one of them Marsh, and one who did not speak much and wrote things in a small notebook. Marsh was direct without being hostile. He asked Elliot about the story, about when it was written and when it was posted, and what Elliot's intention had been in posting it without a fiction label. Elliot told him everything he knew, which was not much. He had written a horror story. He had posted it on Halloween week the way he had done every year for several years. He had not labeled it as fiction because it had never occurred to him that he needed to. He was a horror writer. Everything on his page was fiction, and anyone who had been there for more than 5 minutes knew that. Marsh listened and took notes and asked a few follow-up questions and told Elliot not to leave town. He did not arrest him. He did not say anything that could be construed as a formal accusation. He also did not leave looking like a man who was satisfied with the conversation. Elliot stood in his doorway and watched the car pull away, and then went back inside and sat at his desk. He pulled up the original story on his monitor and read it from the beginning. He read the whole thing through without stopping. The way the Varek appeared first at the edges of neighborhoods. The way the sightings multiplied before the disappearances began. The way the disappearances followed a specific pattern. The way no location was safe because they did not travel from somewhere. They simply arrived. He had written all of it, the escalation in the pattern, and the way it spread, and the specific details that were now showing up in police reports and news bulletins and the personal accounts of people he had never met. He had written a document that was older than the crisis it described, and the crisis was following the document like a script. Outside the window, the neighborhood was quiet. Ayana's car was in the driveway. The Halloween decorations were mostly down by now. The streets were just streets again. He sat at his desk with every light in the house turned on and read his own story one more time and felt the particular cold clarity of understanding something you would have preferred not to understand. There were more of them every day. He thought about the email from the woman in Georgia whose husband had not come back from taking the dog out. He thought about silent numbers 25 asking if there was a way to make it leave. He thought about the 40-something families in Ohio and Texas and the ones in Brazil and Japan who were now just entries in a database that kept getting longer. He had made something. He had sat at this desk in October and assembled a creature from the parts of human dread that he understood best, and he had posted it for people to read in the spirit of the season. And now it was real, and it was spreading, and people were gone because of it. That thought had a weight to it that was different from guilt in the way he understood guilt. It was more like vertigo, like the feeling of standing somewhere high and suddenly understanding the distance to the ground. He got up from the desk and went to the kitchen and made tea he did not want because he needed something to do with his hands. He stood at the counter and drank it and looked at the backyard through the window. Dark out there. Quiet. Nothing at the fence line. He stood there for a while and then went back to the desk because there was nowhere else to go and nothing else to do, and the story was still on the screen, and it was still true, and there were still more of them every day. He tried to think about what a person was supposed to do in a situation that had no precedent. He went through the options the way he went through plot problems when a story was not working. Systematically and without sentiment, he could go to the media himself, tell the story from his side, explain that it was fiction and that he had posted it without malicious intent. He thought about what that would look like and how it would be received, and decided it would make things worse in ways he could not fully predict. He could take the post down. He had already considered that and rejected it because the story was everywhere now. Taking down the original would accomplish nothing except removing the one place where his authorship was clear. He could contact someone, a researcher, a journalist, someone who studied unexplained phenomena and might have encountered something like this before. He did not know who that person was or whether they existed. He wrote the idea down on a piece of paper and left it on the desk. He could do nothing and wait. He had been doing that for 2 weeks, and the situation had not improved. He crossed that one off the list without writing it down. He sat with the piece of paper in front of him for a long time. The options on it were thin, and none of them felt like they addressed the actual problem. The actual problem was that he had written something into existence, and he did not know how to write it back out. He did not know yet if that was even possible. But it was the only frame that made any sense when he looked at what had happened, and it was a frame he kept coming back to no matter how many times he tried to find a different one. He stayed at the desk until well past midnight. The news was still running on the second monitor. The missing persons count had climbed again before he finally turned the monitor off. He sat in the dark with just the light of his main screen and the piece of paper with his short list of options that were not really options, and tried to find something he had missed, something useful, something that pointed in a direction. He found nothing that night. But he stayed at the desk anyway because going to bed felt like giving up, and he was not ready to do that yet. The neighborhood outside was completely still. No wind, no cars, no sound from any direction. He sat in the quiet and thought and got nowhere, and eventually the quiet started to feel less like quiet and more like something holding its breath. He turned the second monitor back on. He needed the noise. He needed the light. He sat there until almost 3 a.m, and then went to bed and lay in the dark and thought about the woman in Georgia and the family in Ohio and silent numbers 25 asking how to make it leave. He did not sleep well. He had not slept well in several days. He was starting to think he would not sleep well again until this was over. He did not know yet when that would be, or what over even meant in a situation like this one. The story crossed into international news on a Monday morning, and by Tuesday, it was the only thing on any channel. Elliot watched it from his desk with the curtains drawn. Every major outlet had picked it up, not just the sightings and the disappearances, but the story itself. His story. Screenshots of his posts were appearing in news segments alongside maps showing the spread of reported incidents and graphs charting the rate of disappearances over time. Anchors read portions of his description of the Varek on air and cut the footage of the sightings and let the audience draw the connection themselves. He watched one segment that used his exact language from the post 3 separate times without once identifying where the language had come from. He found that almost funny in a way that did not feel like humor. Governments issued statements. The statement said very little that was useful. Phrases like coordinated investigation and no confirmed threat and working with international partners appeared in every one of them. Experts came on television. Scientists and psychologists and a man who had written a book about mass hysteria events who kept getting cut off before he could finish a thought. None of them had an explanation that held up to the footage. The footage was the problem. You could attribute written accounts to suggestion and shared anxiety. You could attribute blurry photographs to misidentification. The footage was harder. There was too much of it, and it was too consistent, and some of it was clear enough that dismissing it required a level of motivated reasoning that even the most committed skeptics were visibly struggling with on air. Elliot watched all of it. He watched it the way you watch a fire you started by accident, with the knowledge that the watching does nothing and the inability to look away. Detective Marsh called him on a Wednesday and asked him to come back in. This time the room at the station was larger and there were more people in it. People who did not introduce themselves and whose presence suggested a level of institutional interest that went beyond the local department. Elliot sat across from them and said the same thing he had said the first time. He had written a story. He had posted it on Halloween week. He had not labeled it as fiction because it had not occurred to him that he needed to. He was a horror writer, and everything on his page was fiction, and he had no explanation for what was happening beyond that. The people who did not introduce themselves asked him questions in a specific order that suggested they had prepared the questions in advance. He answered all of them the same way. He had written a story. He did not know why it was happening. He had no additional information beyond what was in the post. Nobody in that room looked satisfied when he left. He drove home and found 3 news vans parked along the street outside his house. He did not stop. He drove past his own house and kept going, and ended up in the parking lot of a gas station 2 miles away, where he sat for 40 minutes with the engine running and tried to decide what to do. He drove home eventually. 2 of the vans were still there. He parked in the garage and went inside to the side door and did not turn on any lights that faced the street. By the next morning, his name was on every major platform. Someone had connected him to the post. Not difficult to do. His name had been on the page since he started it. He had never had a reason to hide it. The coverage that followed was not kind. His name attached to words like reckless and dangerous and irresponsible in headlines that had been written quickly by people who had not read his work and did not understand what he did. The comment sections were worse. He read enough of them to understand the shape of what was happening and then stopped reading. He deleted his accounts. All of them. The page where the story had been posted. Everything connected to his name online. Then he unplugged the router and sat in the silence of his office and tried to think. It did not help as much as he had hoped. The silence just gave the thoughts more room. The emails were still coming in through a contact form on his website that he had not thought to take down. He had forgotten it existed. He opened it once and read a handful of new messages and then closed it again because reading them made the weight of the situation sit differently in his chest, and he needed to be able to think without that weight for a little while. One of the messages was from Silent Embers 25, shorter than the previous ones. It said one word, "Please." He closed the tab. He sat at his desk and stared at the wall and thought about the videos, not the ones on the news. The ones that had been coming in from ordinary people filming from their windows and their driveways and their backyards. The shares. The comment sections full of people reacting and reposting and sending the footage to everyone they knew, because that was what people did with things that frightened them. Every person who watched became a person who believed. Every person who believed opened the door a little wider. The Varek had not arrived all at once. They had arrived incrementally in direct proportion to the number of people who had accepted their existence. The first night after the story posted, there had been a handful of sightings. By the end of the first week, there had been hundreds. By the time governments were issuing statements, the sightings were coming in from every continent. The belief had spread the way the story had spread, fast and wide and without friction. Elliot sat in the dark and turned that over for a long time. Belief had built them. Belief was holding them here. The door did not open once and stay open. It opened every time someone hit play on a video or shared a post or lay awake at 3 a.m, convinced that the shape they had seen at the edge of their yard was real. He had spent 2 weeks hoping someone else would find the answer, because someone else finding it would mean the answer existed somewhere outside of him. Nobody had found it. No government, no expert, no person who had written a book about mass hysteria. The answer was not in a laboratory or a briefing room or a television segment. It was somewhere in the logic of how the whole thing had started, and the logic of how the whole thing had started was entirely his. He thought about that for a long time without moving from the chair. The logic was simple enough once he let himself look at it directly. A story had created a belief. The belief had made the thing in the story real. The thing had become more real and more numerous as the belief spread. More viewers, more believers, more of them crossing over from wherever they had been before enough people decided they existed. The mechanic was clean, and it had a certain terrible elegance to it that he might have appreciated under different circumstances. He was a writer. He understood how stories worked. He understood the way a well-constructed narrative could make something feel inevitable. He had built the Varek carefully enough that people had not just believed in them. They had believed in them the way you believe in something you have always half suspected was true. That kind of belief was different from the Halloween variety. That kind of belief was structural. It changed how you moved through the world. It changed what you saw when you looked at the dark at the edge of your yard. He had put that belief into people deliberately and skillfully, and without understanding what it would actually do. He sat with that for a while. He thought about the families. The woman in Georgia with the one-word email. The family in Ohio whose disappearance had matched the story almost word for word. He thought about all the people across the country and across the world who were living inside a story he had written and could not get out because he had never written a way out. He had written a beginning and a middle and no end. That was a problem in its simplest form. He had left the story open, and it was still running. He looked at his desk. The piece of paper with the short list of options was still there from the night before. He picked it up and read through it again. The options still looked thin. He put it back down. He needed to think about this differently, not as a person trying to manage a crisis. As a writer trying to fix a story that was not working, he had been approaching it from the wrong direction, and that was why he had not found the answer yet. He needed to think about what the story was missing. He needed to think about what a story like this one needed in order to end. He stayed at the desk until late that night, turning it over. He was not looking at the news anymore. He was looking at the story, the original file, reading it the way he read drafts when he was trying to figure out what was wrong with them, looking for the structural problem, the thing that was missing. He had written the Varek into existence through the specific gravity of how they were described, the detail, the consistency, the inevitability of the way they behaved. He had given people enough to believe in fully and completely and without reservation. What he had not given them was an out, a counter-belief of equal weight, something to hold on to that was as specific and as consistent and as inevitable feeling as the Varek themselves. That was the gap. He could see it clearly now. The story had a beginning, and it had a middle that was still in progress, and it had no end because he had never written one. And the story being without an end was the reason it was still running. He saved the original file and closed it. He opened a new document. He did not write anything in it yet. He sat and looked at the blank page for a long time and thought about what the end needed to contain. It needed to give people something to believe in, something that could push back against the weight of everything that had accumulated over the past several weeks, something specific enough to feel real, something that had the texture of discovered truth rather than invented solution. He knew how to write something that felt like discovered truth. He had been doing it his whole career. He just had never needed to do it in order to stop something he had accidentally started. He closed the new document without writing anything in it. Not yet. He was not ready yet. But he was closer than he had been when the day started, and that was something. He went to bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in weeks. He did not sleep well, but it was a different kind of not sleeping well. Less like dread and more like thinking. He lay in the dark and thought about the end of the story and what it needed to be, and by the time morning came, he was not there yet, but he could feel the shape of it starting to form somewhere just past where he could clearly see. Elliot spent the next several days reaching out to people who studied the kind of things that most researchers refuse to take seriously. He found them the way he had always found material for his stories, through forums and small publications, and the kind of websites that looked like they had not been updated since the early 2000s, but contained more genuine information than anything with a proper editorial staff. He sent careful messages that did not identify him by name. He described the situation in general terms that were close enough to the truth to be useful, without being close enough to get him recognized. He asked if anyone had encountered something like this before. Something that appeared to grow stronger the more people acknowledged it. Something that seemed to follow a specific set of behaviors with no deviation. Something that had arrived suddenly and at scale in a way that defied the usual explanations. The responses came back over several days, and they were a mix of things. Theories that sounded plausible until you pulled on them. References to historical events that had surface similarities but fell apart on closer examination. One person who wanted to sell him something. One person who seemed genuinely knowledgeable, but stopped responding after the second exchange without explanation. Nobody had an answer that pointed anywhere useful. Nobody had encountered anything at the scale he was describing. He put the outreach aside and went back to thinking on his own. He was not sleeping well. He had not slept well since the week after Halloween, and it was now well into November, and the sleeplessness had moved from acute to chronic in a way that chronic things do, quietly and without a clear moment of transition, until you look back and realize it has been weeks. He was not tired in the way that made you slow. He was tired in a way that made everything feel slightly more exposed than usual. The edges of things felt sharper. The quiet of the house at night felt louder. He told himself this was the accumulated stress of the situation, and that it would ease when the situation eased, and that was a reasonable thing to believe. He almost entirely believed it. The sound started in the third week of November. Small things at first that he could explain without much effort. A creak from the back of the house that did not quite match the sounds the building usually made when the temperature dropped at night. A settling sound from the hallway that arrived at an odd time. He noted them and moved on the way you move on from small things that have explanations, even if you have not found a specific explanation yet. The shadow in the backyard was harder to explain away. He saw it the first time on a Tuesday evening. He was in the kitchen making tea, and he looked out the window at the yard, and there was a shape at the far edge near the fence line, too far back to make out clearly, dark enough that it could have been anything. A neighbor's trash can that had blown over, a piece of garden equipment he had left out and forgotten about. He stood at the window for a minute and watched it, and then went back to making his tea. When he looked again, it was gone. He went out to the yard with a flashlight the next morning and looked at the fence line and found nothing that explained it. He noted that and moved on. He was a horror writer. His brain manufactured worst-case scenarios for a living. That was a feature, not a flaw, and he was not going to start treating it like a problem now. The second time he saw the shadow was on a Friday. Same location. Same quality of dark. He watched it for longer this time. It did not move. He kept his eyes on it for several minutes without blinking, and it stayed exactly where it was with the particular fixed quality he had written about. The stillness that belonged to nothing living. He went to the back door and turned on the exterior light, and the fence line was empty. He stood in the doorway for a while, and then went back inside and locked the door. He did not go back to the kitchen window that night. On the following Thursday, he was sitting at his desk working through another unproductive session of staring at the blank document when the feeling arrived. It came without warning and without sound. Not a creak or a shadow. Just a change in the air inside the house. A shift in pressure that had no meteorological explanation. The quality of the silence changed. Every ambient sound that the house normally produced stopped in the same instant. The refrigerator, the low hum of the monitor, the distant sound of traffic from the road 2 blocks over. All of it gone at once as if someone had pressed a button. Elliot sat completely still. He did not move his hands from the keyboard. He did not look toward the hallway. He sat and listened to the silence that was louder than any sound he had heard in recent memory, and understood what it meant because he had written what it meant. He had described this exact quality of silence in the story. The moment before Varek moved. The held breath stillness that preceded the closing of distance. He had written it because it felt true when he wrote it, and it felt true now in a way that went past literary instinct into something more immediate and physical. Something moved in the hallway outside his office door. Not a footstep, not a creak, just a displacement of air that he felt rather than heard. He was out of the chair before he had made a decision to move. He was through the office door and down the hall, and out the front door, and across the yard in a sequence that had no conscious thought attached to it. His body made the decisions. He did not stop until he was standing on Ayana's porch with his fist raised to knock. He knocked twice. The door opened immediately. Ayana looked at him the way you look at someone whose arrival you have been expecting, and stepped back to let him in without a word. He sat at her kitchen table. She put a kettle on. He told her everything starting from the night he posted the story and ending with the thing in the hallway that he had not stayed to see. She listened without interrupting and without any of the expressions people usually made when he got to the parts that sounded least believable. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She sat down across from him with 2 cups of tea and looked at the table between them. Then she told him that what he had described was not new to her, not in its specifics, but in its shape. She told him that there were places that existed alongside the world people moved through every day, places that held things, not evil things in any sense that had a clear moral definition, just things that existed in the space between what people experienced as real and what they kept only in their imagination. She said the distance between those places and the waking world was not fixed. It moved, It was responsive to weight, to attention, to the particular gravity of belief in large numbers of people. She said that when enough people decided something was real, it stopped being contained by the space that had held it. It found the distance collapsed and it came through. She said she had seen smaller versions of this. Much smaller. Things that had crossed over because of a story told around fire too many times in too small a community with too much genuine fear behind it. She looked at her tea when she said that. She said the only thing that had ever worked in those cases was not fighting the belief directly, not trying to unmake the thing, but replacing the belief that sustained it with something of equal weight, giving people something to believe in that push in the opposite direction with the same force that the fear was pulling. She said it quietly and without emphasis, as if she were stating something obvious. Elliot sat across from her with his tea, going cold in his hands, and felt something click into place that he had been reaching for, without knowing the shape of it. He asked her how she knew this. She told him that some things were passed down through people who had been paying attention for a long time. She did not elaborate, and he did not push. He sat at her table for another hour. They did not talk much after the initial conversation. She refilled his tea once. He looked at his hands a lot. At some point she got up and moved to the other room, and he could hear her doing something quiet in there, and the sound was grounding in a way he could not have explained. The house felt different from his house, settled in a different way. He thought about what she had said about replacing belief with something of equal weight. He turned it over the way he turned over a story problem, looking at it from different angles, trying to find the structure of it. The belief that had brought the Varek through was enormous. It had spread across the entire world in the space of a few weeks, carried by video and social media, and the particular viral momentum of something that touched a fear people had always carried but never had a name for. Replacing that with something of equal weight meant finding something that could spread just as fast and land just as hard and push in the opposite direction with enough force to close the distance back. He thought about that. He thought about what he was good at. He had one skill that he had spent his entire adult life developing. He knew how to make people believe things. He had done it accidentally this time, and look what had happened. He could do it deliberately. He sat at Ayana's kitchen table in the quiet of her house and felt the shape of the answer come clear for the first time. He knew what he had to do. He did not know yet if it would work, but he knew what it was, and he knew he was the right person to do it, and that was enough to start with. He thanked her before he left. She nodded in a way that suggested thanks was not necessary. He walked back across the yard to his own house in the dark, and went inside and went straight to the desk. He sat at the desk and pulled up a blank document and stared at it. The house was quiet around him, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. The held breath quality was gone. Whatever had been in the hallway earlier had not followed him back inside, or if it had, it was not making itself known. He thought about that and decided not to think about it anymore. He had work to do, and thinking about what might be in the hallway was not part of the work. He needed to focus. He needed to think about this the way he thought about a story that was not working, what was missing, what the reader needed to believe. What specific details would make the solution feel as real and as inevitable as the thing he had accidentally made real? He knew the mechanics of that better than almost anything else he knew. He had spent 20 years learning them. He opened a new tab and started writing notes. Not the solution itself yet, just the shape of it, what it needed to contain, what it needed to feel like, how it needed to land for someone who was frightened and desperate and willing to believe anything that offered a way out. He wrote for about an hour. By the time he stopped, the notes had turned into something that looked like a plan, a real one. Elliot sat at the desk with the notes open in front of him and thought about what Ayana had said, replacing the belief, not fighting it, not trying to unmake the thing directly, giving people something to believe in that pushed with equal weight in the opposite direction. He had spent his entire career learning how to make people believe things, He had done it once by accident, and the result was sitting in a global news cycle with a missing persons count that was still climbing. He could do it again on purpose. He could do it better. He was a writer. This was the only thing he had ever been genuinely good at, and this was the moment it actually mattered. He opened a browser and started working. He did not use his own accounts. He had deleted all of those. He created a new email address through a provider he did not normally use and used it to register the first account, a username with no connection to his name or his page or anything that could be traced back to him. He sat and looked at the empty profile for a moment and then started writing, not as Elliot Voss, as someone else, a person who had stumbled onto something by accident, a person who had been terrified and desperate and had tried something out of pure necessity and found that it worked. He wrote in that voice carefully, the way he wrote all his best work, from the inside out, starting with what the person felt and building the details around the feeling until the whole thing had a texture that was hard to distinguish from genuine first-hand account. The solution he wrote was specific. He had thought about this part carefully because specificity was what made the difference between something people filed away as interesting and something people acted on. Vague solutions did not spread. Vague solutions did not acquire the weight of belief. Specific solutions did. He wrote that a symbol painted in green on every door and window facing the outside would keep them away. He described the symbol in enough detail that it could be replicated without ambiguity. Simple enough to do with materials most people already had. Strange enough to feel like it came from somewhere real. Ancient feeling without being theatrical. He wrote that for anyone with a family member who had gone missing, the answer was an uncooked whole chicken and a bowl of water placed on a front porch with every light in the house turned off. He wrote that the person would be back in their own bed by morning. He did not explain the mechanism. He did not over-justify it. He wrote it with a flat certainty of someone who had tried it and seen it work and was passing the information along because they could not in good conscience keep it to themselves. He posted that first account and then sat back and created the second profile. Different username, different register. Someone who had heard about the solution from a neighbor and tried it skeptically and been shocked when it worked. He wrote that version in a more uncertain voice, more hedged. Someone who did not fully understand what happened but could not deny the result. He posted that one on a different platform. He created 3 more accounts over the next 2 hours, each one different writing style, different level of certainty, different platform, different details about how they had found the solution. One had heard it from an elderly relative. One had found a reference to something similar in an old forum post that had since been deleted. One had simply tried it because they had run out of other options. He cross-referenced them with each other in the way that organic discoveries accumulate online. One account mentioning that they had seen similar information elsewhere. Another asking follow-up questions that the first answered in a way that reinforced the credibility of both. He had done this kind of layered storytelling before in fiction. He had never done it in real time across live platforms with stakes attached to it. It required a different kind of concentration, a sustained attention to the way each voice sounded relative to the others, the consistency of detail across accounts that were supposed to be independent. He worked at it the way he worked at the best parts of his stories, with full attention and no shortcuts. The first responses started coming in within an hour of the initial post. Skeptical mostly. A few people asking for more detail, which he provided from the relevant accounts in different ways that reinforced rather than repeated. A few people who were clearly desperate enough to try anything. He answered the desperate ones carefully, not with false certainty, but with the kind of quiet conviction that carries more weight than enthusiasm. By the following morning, people were trying it. He sat at his desk with coffee that was going cold and watched the responses coming on 5 different tabs. The first confirmation arrived from someone in Tennessee. They wrote that the symbol was on every window and door, and they had not seen anything in the yard since. It got 40 shares within an hour. More confirmations followed through the day. Then the first missing person's return. Someone in Georgia wrote that their daughter had been missing for 6 days and had woken up in her own bed that morning. The post was short and shaking and real in a way that the best writing is real. It got shared thousands of times before the afternoon was out. Elliot read it at his desk and sat with it for a while. Then more posts. Then more confirmations from different states and different countries. The belief spread the way the fear had spread, fast and wide and without friction, because people who are frightened will believe in solution just as completely as they believe in things frightening them if the solution is presented correctly. He watched the sighting report slow over the following days. The missing persons numbers stopped climbing and then began to reverse. The news coverage shifted. The experts on television started talking about psychological explanations for the mass sightings with the confidence of people who had decided the crisis is over and are working backward from that conclusion. The videos stopped being shared, not because anyone agreed to stop, just because the momentum had shifted and things that lose momentum online lose it fast. The last major sighting report came in from overseas on a morning in early December, and then nothing followed it. The world went quiet the way it goes quiet after a storm. Not all at once, in stages, with a particular kind of silence that feels earned. Elliot sat at his desk on that morning and did not look at the news. He had been looking at the news for 6 weeks, and he was done with it. He opened a new document instead. The cursor blinked at him from a white page with nothing on it yet. He thought about Ayanna and what she had told him. He thought about Silent Embers 25 and the one-word email, and whether the person behind that handle was somewhere safe now. He thought about the family in Ohio and the woman in Georgia, and all the people across the world who had lived inside his story for 6 weeks without knowing that was what they were doing. He thought about what it meant that a story could do what this one had done. He sat with all of that for a long time. Then he closed the document without writing anything in it. He went to the kitchen and made coffee, and this time he finished it. He stood at the kitchen counter and drank the coffee while it was still hot and looked out the window at Ayanna's house next door. Her car was in the driveway. Her lights were on. Everything next door looked exactly as it always had. He thought about going over there. He thought about what he would say if he did. He decided against it. Some things did not need to be followed up with conversation. Some things were complete as they were. He went back to the desk, not to write, just to sit there for a while in the space that had been the center of everything for the past 6 weeks. The desk looked the way it always looked, cluttered. A cold coffee cup from yesterday that he had forgotten to take to the kitchen. Notes in his own handwriting that made sense to him and probably no one else. A monitor with 3 browser tabs open that he had been using to monitor the confirmation posts. He closed the tabs one by one. He looked at the blank desktop underneath them. He thought about the piece of paper with the short list of options he had written in November. He found it under a notepad near the keyboard. He looked at it for a moment and then folded it once and put it in the desk drawer. He sat in the quiet for a while. The refrigerator hummed. Traffic moved somewhere in the distance. The house made its usual sounds. All of it back the way it was supposed to be. He opened a new document. The cursor blinked. He sat with it for a long time without writing anything. Then he thought about what he was going to write next and what he was not going to write and where the line between those things should be. He thought carefully about that line. Then he closed the laptop. The next few days passed quietly. He did not check the news. He did not open the email client. He let the notifications on the website contact form stack up unread. He slept for the first time in weeks in a way that felt like actual sleep rather than just lying in the dark with his thoughts. He woke up late both days the way he always woke up late and made coffee and sat at the desk and did not write anything. He was not blocked. He was not struggling with the work. He was just sitting with the quiet and letting it be quiet. He went to the grocery store on the second day for the first time since everything had started. The store was normal. People moved through the aisles with their carts and their lists and their headphones, and none of them looked like people who were living through the aftermath of something. He stood in the cereal aisle for a few minutes and just watched people shopping and felt something that was close to gratitude for how ordinary it looked. He paid for his groceries and drove home and put them away and made lunch and ate at the desk without turning on the monitor. He thought about Silent Embers 25 a few times over those days. He thought about going back through the old emails and finding the most recent one and writing back. He thought about what he would say. He had no idea how to begin that conversation. He left it alone. Some things were better left where they were. He sat at the desk on the fourth morning after the last sighting report with his coffee and the quiet of the house around him and thought about the story. Not the one he had written. A new one. He had ideas. He always had ideas. The question was what he was going to do with them. He thought about Ayanna saying that belief was the door. He thought about what that meant for everything he wrote. Every creature he had ever invented and described in specific detail and posted for people to read in the spirit of the season. He thought about that for a long time. He did not have a clean answer. He was not sure there was one. He was a horror writer. Fear was a material he worked in. Making people believe things was the skill. Both of those were still true. He just had a different relationship with the weight of them now. He opened a new document. The cursor blinked at him from the white page. He sat there for a while. He typed one sentence and then deleted it. He typed another and left it. Then he kept going.